The proclamation arrived in a burst of colorless light. Across human space, screens in homes and shipboard common rooms and crowded station bars flickered, reset, and replaced local programming with the smooth, pale face of a Calareth official in ceremonial gray. The emblem of the Dominion hovered behind him, an unbroken circle around a stylized star, the symbol of perfect harmony. The Calareth Dominion, the official began, his voice translated into 100 tongues at once, has always cherished stability and concord among its member worlds. Recent disturbances, however, have revealed a troubling pattern. Certain human cultural observances generate spikes in chaotic emotional resonance, increasing unrest, violence, and non-compliance. On the human space station Port Halcyon, 3 decks down from the main concourse, the crew of the HSS Polaris Run watched in a silence edged with dread. Captain Orion Malik stood with his hands clasped behind his back. The faint, old scar along his jaw tightened as the official continued. These events, often clustered around your cold season months, have become a vector for subversive activity. In response, under authority of Archregent Vithek and the Cultural Integrity Council, the Dominion issues the Harmony Proclamation. Text scrolled beneath him, legal clauses translating in real time. Orion's eyes picked out words even before the translation finished. Temporary suspension. Human winter celebrations. Gatherings prohibited. Display of associated symbols prohibited. Candle belt jurisdiction. Enforcement by Tranquility Wardens. Full cooperation required. Dr. Hanna Velasquez, slight and sharp-eyed, leaned forward in her seat. Her fingers tightened on the rim of the console. They're not just banning gatherings, she murmured. They're banning anything that looks like joy. In the row behind, Sergeant Niko Imani folded his arms, dark brows knitting. We always knew they didn't like how we party, but this is different. Samira al-Bakir lounged sideways in her chair, boots hooked on the rail in defiance of decorum. She sat up now, no trace of a smile left. They're scared, she said. Look at that guy's eyes. This isn't about noise complaints. The Calareth official droned on about metrics and stability, but the important part had already burned itself into everyone's mind. 40 human-majority colonies in the Candlebelt worlds that had built entire seasonal rhythms around their winter festivals would see their celebrations turned into crimes. The scene cut to carefully curated clips, footage of human festivals taken out of context, slowed and darkened so that the laughing faces and bright lights looked more like a riot than a party. Overlay graphs showed lines labeled emotional amplitude, surging upward in terrifying spikes. Effective immediately, the official concluded, unauthorized observances will be treated as acts of cultural sabotage. This decision is scientific. It is necessary. It is for your own good. On the screen, the Dominion emblem expanded until it filled all available pixels. Harmony, smothering everything beneath it. Orion let the silence stretch out after the broadcast ended. He heard the faint hum of the station's life support, the clink of someone's ring against a mug, the soft curse from Davor Zelinsky, his chief engineer. Hanna spoke first. This is going to break people, she said. Not just a little, deep. These holidays, this one especially, it's how frontier families get through the hunger months, the long, dark. You strip that away, and you leave nothing in its place. She trailed off, but Orion knew exactly where her thoughts had gone. To riots. To despair. To quiet, dangerous resolve. They're not breaking us, Samira said. They're poking us with a big stupid stick and hoping we don't notice. Amrita Kulkarni turned from her logistics console, dark hair pulled back, eyes already flicking between storage rosters and shipping schedules. You know what this does to commerce? To supply lines? Half the Candlebelt budgets its whole year around the uptick from the winter trade. Decorations, foods, travel. You cut all that. You don't just kill cheer. You crash economies. Orion finally spoke. Maybe that's part of the point, he said quietly. If everyone's scrambling for basic survival, nobody has time to resist. On the far wall, the display shifted from the proclamation to a bland, looping graphic announcing mandatory briefings for all humans serving in Dominion-aligned fleets. The crew began to drift toward the exit, muttering. Niko stayed. Orders, Captain? For now, Orion said, we listen, we attend the briefing, we nod, and say we understand. Then we find out what comes next. Hana rose, eyes distant. Whatever it is, she said, I think we just saw the first shot. The briefing was held on the station's central concourse, under the curved dome of transparent alloy that showed Port Halcyon's slow rotation against a scatter of distant stars. Human officers and crew filled the tiered seats in neat rows, surrounded by a handful of non-human observers. A Kalareth liaison, a narrow-shouldered figure with pale translucent skin and dark reflective eyes, delivered the details. The Harmony Proclamation applied to all Candlebelt worlds. Authorized virtual observances could be requested through approved channels. Unstructured, unsupervised gatherings carried escalating penalties, from fines to detention without trial. Behind the liaison, a holographic map spun, highlighting each of the 40 worlds in turn, snowbound moons and ocean platforms, arid planets with glittering domed cities, asteroid habitats strung like beads through belts of rock and ice. Orion watched the glowing dots, and with each one, a memory flared. Hearthspire, his homeworld, where every winter the streets had filled with light and music and the scent of spiced breads. Where his grandmother had hung hand-carved ornaments on a tiny evergreen in their cramped apartment, telling him stories of ancient Earth winters. Asterion Reach, a young world where he had once spent leave watching children skate on a frozen river under swaying lanterns. Morrow's Landing, a bleak but stubborn settlement on the edge of a crater sea, whose miners had invited him one year to share a feast in a repurposed drilling hall lit by a single, enormous communal tree, cobbled together from scrap metal and glowing wire. The liaison's words washed over him like cold water. All enforcement actions, the Kalareth said, will be supported by the Serenity Net. This adaptive security infrastructure will monitor for anomalous gatherings, power usage spikes consistent with mass illumination, and other indicators of unsanctioned activity. At that, Hannah made a soft sound of disgust. Orion glanced at her. They're not just watching for violence, she murmured. They're watching for happiness. After the briefing, as the crowd broke up, Orion drifted to the edge of the concourse. The station's wide windows looked out on a forest of docked ships. On one pier rested the Polaris Run, long and lean, hull plates patched from too many close calls, still bearing the faded crest of the Terran Exploration Corps from before humans had accepted Dominion oversight. He sensed someone approach and turned. A Thessari stood near the rail, hands folded. Skin in soft shades of emerald shimmered faintly under the station lights. Large liquid eyes regarded him with what, to a human, translated as gentle sadness. Captain Malik, the Thessari said, their voice like two chords struck together. I am Salin Rune. We have not met, but I have followed your career. May we speak? Orion nodded warily. I serve at the Dominion's pleasure, he said. If this is about the proclamation. It is, Salin said. And it is not. Walk with me, please. They strolled the concourse, weaving around clusters of officers and vendors closing up their stalls. Salin's gaze lingered on a kiosk where a human woman was hastily packing away strings of colored lights and bins of ornaments, her motions jerky with barely contained anger. In my culture, Salin said softly, we have a saying, what you forbid in the light grows sharp in the dark. Orion gave a humorless smile. Humans have a similar idea. The proclamation is a test, Salin continued. If it succeeds in suppressing your celebrations without significant pushback, the Dominion will extend similar measures to others. My people are inconveniently emotional as well. You're telling me this as a friend? Orion asked. Or as a representative of the Thessari delegation? As someone who dislikes to see a fire suffocated, Salin replied. We did not earn our seat on the council by being oblivious. Do not assume the Dominion speaks for all of us. They shifted their weight, hesitating. The Serenity Net will learn you, Salin said. It will adapt. It is very good at predicting the probability of unrest and recommending preemptive measures. But it has blind spots, patterns it does not expect, and it is still maintained by people. Orion studied them. "Are you offering help?" "I am saying," Salen replied, "that if humans choose not to accept this quietly, there are those who will not stand in their way, and some who will nudge when nudging is possible." They met his eyes. There was no mistaking the intensity there. "Be very certain of what you are willing to risk," Salen said, "because once you light something like this, it will not easily go out again." Later, back aboard Polaris Run, Orion sat alone in his dimly lit cabin. A message icon pulsed on his desk display, priority, unfiltered. The station's filters had flagged it as low-level propaganda from an unsecured colonial channel. But some subroutine, or someone, had let it through to the captain's queue. He opened it. The image was shaky, recorded on a cheap wearable camera. A boy, maybe 15, his hair in uneven braids, stood in a public square beneath a pale sky. Behind him, a group of children huddled around a pile of handmade ornaments and carved animals, painted stars, and folded paper birds. Around the square, towering in polished armor, stood Tranquility Wardens, Kalereth, and a few other species in Dominion uniform, weapons slung, expressions blank. "This is Asterion Reach," the boy's voice said, thin but steady. "They told us we can't hang these this year, that the lights make people unstable." The camera swiveled. A warden officer gestured. One of the armored figures hefted a portable incinerator. A tongue of controlled flame hissed out, licking across the pile. Paint blistered. Handmade objects blackened and crumpled. Some of the younger kids cried out. One tried to leap forward and was held back by an adult's desperate grip. The boy filming did not look away. The camera stayed on the flames until nothing recognizable remained. "Captain," he said, "we heard your ship was near. We don't know if this will ever reach you. But if they can take this from us, what's left that belongs to us? What part of us is still ours?" The recording ended. Orion sat very still, staring at the blank screen. He could almost smell the scorched paint and plastic, hear the muffled sobs. What's left that belongs to us? He closed his eyes. Behind his lids, a memory rose. Himself at 10 on Hearthspire, reaching up to hang a tiny wooden comet on his grandmother's little tree. Her hands rough but gentle as she guided his fingers. Her voice whispering an old story of a traveler who crossed the sky in one night, bringing gifts to light-starved villages. He opened his eyes to the present, to a Dominion that had just declared that story contraband. He rose, straightened his uniform, and headed for the conference room. The core officers of Polaris Run were already assembled when Orion arrived. Haina sat with a stack of data slates before her, eyes shadowed but sharp. Amrita had 2 holo displays floating in front of her, lines of cargo codes and route maps glimmering. Daver hunched over a schematic of the ship's systems, big hands twitching with the urge to make adjustments even on a projection. Niko leaned against a bulkhead, arms crossed, eyes scanning everyone else as if measuring their breaking points. Samira sprawled in her seat, kicking one heel nervously against the table leg, trying and failing to affect nonchalance. Celine Farahani, Polaris Run's assigned liaison to Dominion authorities, sat ramrod straight, her diplomatic insignia catching the light. Her dark hair was perfectly in place, but her jaw clenched when she thought no one was looking. Orion took his place at the head of the table. "You all saw the proclamation," he said. "You know what it means for our people in the Candle Belt, and you know what obedience looks like. No songs," Hana said softly. "No lights. No big family dinners. Kids waking up to nothing. On 40 worlds," Amrita added. "Whole economy's gutted. Morale shot to pieces. Tranquility Wardens running every street," Niko said. "Any excuse to crack down. Crowds are threat vectors now. They ordered us to stand down to support remote observances," Celine reminded them. "Our task list now includes distributing approved cultural content, packages, and monitoring for non-compliant activity." Samira snorted. "So we beamed them a loop of a tasteful candle and some slow music while boots kicked their doors in." Orion tapped the table. A projection of the Candle Belt appeared. 40 points of light in a loose crescent. "We have a problem," he said. "Our people are about to be robbed, all at once, of something they count on every year to remind them they're alive. The Dominion calls it dangerous. The Dominion calls anything they don't control dangerous," Hana said. "Exactly," Orion replied. "So here is my question. What can we do that they cannot control?" Silence then. Amrita's eyes narrowed. "We could get physical goods in under the radar," she said slowly. "Not enough for full festivals, but enough to restart them locally. Decorations, food concentrates, projectors, micro-drone kits, little packages that say, 'You are not forgotten.' The Serenity Net will be looking for shipments like that," Selene objected. "They'll search every container with a human origin tag going into the candle belt." Samira's eyes lit up with a feral grin. "Then we don't go in through the front door. We drop. Fast couriers, micro-drones, old smuggler lanes. We make their sensors chase ghosts, while we make deliveries." "Deliveries where?" Niko asked. 40 worlds, scattered across half a sector. "Even with our best FTL, we can't hit all of them in one night. Not with one ship," Amrita said, "but with a lot of small ones." Her fingers flicked. The hologram of the belt blossomed with arcs and roots, lines connecting clusters of worlds. "Break the job down. Clusters of 4 or 5 worlds per courier. Depart from Port Halcyon with legitimate cargo. Then spin off in deep space with losses to navigational error." Her mouth quirked. Errors that just happened to drop them near embargoed systems with perfectly timed course corrections. Devore rubbed his chin, frowning. "We'd need to modify our storage bays. Balcony deployers for drop pods. Heat baffles, so we don't look like a holiday store from orbit." Hana tapped her data slates. "And we're not just talking physical objects. Symbols carry meaning. Stories, songs. We can embed instructions in them for how to coordinate, how to resist without firing a shot. Every ornament, every toy, every string of lights can be a seed of something bigger. And name this madness." "What?" Niko asked. Orion looked again at the spinning map. The candle belt shimmered like a handful of sparks ready to fall. "We call it Operation Emberfall," he said. "We drop embers on 40 worlds and trust our people to fan them into flames." Samira whooped softly. Devore shook his head, half-smile tugging at his lips. Amrita's eyes shone in a way that had nothing to do with reflected hololight. Selene's expression remained tight. "You're talking about open defiance of a Dominion edict," she said. "If we're caught, the charge will be cultural sabotage, sedition. They'll strip your command. They'll imprison your families." "I know," Orion said. "That's why this doesn't happen if any one of you says no. This only happens if we all choose it. And if we do, we take steps to protect those back home. We keep our names out of the story where we can. We leak it in ways that make it sound spontaneous, human." Hana's lips curved. "The story of the night when humans brought the band holiday anyway," she said. "That story will travel faster than any courier we launch." Selene closed her eyes for a long moment, then opened them. "The Thessari delegation will not officially endorse this," she said. "But there are sympathizers, Solan Rune among them. They might provide obscure assistance with the Serenity Net. We'll need smugglers," Amrita added. "People who know old, dirty routes, outdated node maps, unlicensed anchor points." Daver snorted. "Where do you find a smuggler crazy enough to go against the Dominion over songs and lights?" "On Port Halcyon," Samira said, already rising from her chair. "Give me 3 hours." Orion nodded. "Then we're decided?" One by one, they gave their assent. Hana simply said, "They can take away the day on the calendar. They don't get to tell us when we're allowed to be human." Niko's jaw clenched.
"I've spent my career obeying bad orders for good reasons," he said.
"This is the first time I've had a good reason to disobey. I'm in." Daver grumbled something about engineering tolerances and lost sleep, but his eyes were bright. "Fine. But if the engines melt, we're celebrating by hand-cranking life support," Amrita said. "I've spent half my life making other people's schedules work. I'd like..." Just once, to build one of my own." Celine took a breath. "My oath is to the safety of my people," she said, "not to the comfort of their masters. I'll cover what I can." Samira slapped the table. "Then let's go steal a holiday," she said. Outside the hull, beyond the curves of Port Halcyon, the candle belt turned in darkness, its 40 worlds unaware that somewhere, in the shadow of a Dominion station, someone had just resolved to bring them light. The smuggler called himself Gorvak Her, captain of the old comet. The comet looked like its name suggested, a cracked, battered vessel that people swore had been flying since before the Dominion existed. Samira found him exactly where she expected, in the lowest, loudest bar on the station, hunched over a mug of something that smoked faintly. A ring of curious onlookers surrounded him as he described, with expansive Jeroen hand gestures, how he had once outrun a pirate flotilla through the Auric Drift with one engine offline and a hole in his cargo bay. "You don't outrun pirates through the drift," someone objected. "You get torn apart." Gorvak's many shoulder plates rattled with laughter. "You do if you know where the currents run," he said. "And if you aren't afraid to let the universe toss you around a little." Samira slid into the crowd. When his story wound down and the bar's noise swelled back to normal, she caught his eye. "Captain Her," she said, "I hear you're not afraid of getting tossed." He eyed her, pupils like drops of oil. "You hear correctly," he said. "You also hear, I prefer to be paid for the privilege." She smiled. "How do you feel about getting paid in more than credit? How do you feel about getting paid in legend?" he snorted. "Legend buys no fuel." "Sometimes it does," she said. "When everyone in the sector owes you a favor." He cocked his head. "You're human." "What kind of favor I want from humans?" "The kind where every human child knows your ship's name," Samira said. "The kind where, when the Dominion posts your capture notice, half the stations in the belt conveniently misplace it." His laughter died. He stared at her, gauging. "You're not here to sell me counterfeit spare parts," he said slowly. "What are you here for?" She leaned in. "Ever heard of a winter holiday banned across 40 worlds? It took hours. It took a bottle and a half of something that made Samira's eyes water and Gorvak's plating flush iridescent. It took 3 calls to Polaris Run with updates and 1 discreet ping from Salen Rune with data on obsolete Serenity Net node maps. By the end of the night, Gorvak's gruff cynicism had melted into the wild-eyed enthusiasm of a creature who lived for stories more than for safety. "You want to drop smugglers into the candle belt on the coldest night of the cycle?" he said at last. "You want to ride the Auric Drift to pop out past Dominion patrols. You want to deliver illegal lights and songs to people who don't even pay." "Yes," Samira said. Gorvak bared his teeth. "When do we start?" Work on Polaris Run accelerated. Under Davor's direction, cargo bays were gutted and refitted with launch racks for dozens of compact drop pods. Each pod could hold a compressed starlight tree, a foldable, skeletal structure of carbon filament, and embedded microlights that could bloom into a 3-meter cone of shifting colors in seconds, as well as ember lanterns, small spheres that stored energy during the day and glowed warmly at night. Hana and a team of volunteers from Port Halcyon's human population worked 14-hour days in cramped workshops. They encoded songs into the lantern firmware, not as obvious tracks that would trigger Serenity Net flags, but as harmonic patterns in the light emissions, rhythms that could be decoded with simple devices into melodies. In the data chips embedded the bases of ornaments. They wove stories, tales from ancient Earth winter festivals, parables from colony founding days, cautionary legends about empires that tried to smother culture and failed. The logistics side was a nightmare, which meant it was exactly the kind of problem Amrita loved. She took Gorvak's legacy maps of smuggler lanes and overlaid them with current Dominion patrol routes, then cross-referenced them with engine efficiency curves and projected weather on target worlds. Snowline Squadron, the name given to the dozen small courier ships that would spin off from Polaris Run, took shape on her screens first as abstractions, then as real vessels fueled and prepped at the docks. Celine played a dangerous game. She filed shipping manifests that described the contents of their cargo as winter relief kits, heating units, nutritional supplements, medical supplies, and stamped them with the seals of 3 different humanitarian organizations. She drafted formal requests for permission to relocate non-essential cultural artifacts from the Candle Belt to Port Halcyon for safekeeping, masking the outbound flow of actual festival goods behind an illusory inbound flow of dusty museum pieces. Salen, somewhere in the shadowy corridors of interspecies diplomacy, leaned on a handful of sympathetic technicians who had access to Serenity Net algorithms. "It is tasked with spotting danger," Salen explained to Hana, over a secure channel. "So we encourage it to think of your overt festivities as harmless. We nudge its training data. We feed it examples of big, bright, noisy events that result in joy and commerce, not uprisings. We convince it to call those things safe. And if we give it too much, it might tune them all out," Hannah said. "Exactly," Salen replied. "You are not the only species with festivals." When word of Operation Emberfall began to seep through certain human circles on Port Halcyon, the response was bewildering and immediate. Some were horrified. This was insanity. Poking the Dominion like this was going to get people killed over lights and songs. Others were electrified. Planning sessions blossomed in encrypted chat rooms, on the backs of napkins in crowded mess halls, in the quiet corners of family quarters, after children had gone to sleep. Volunteers formed clandestine committees on Candlebelt worlds. They made lists, families who had lost members to Warden raids, elders who knew old songs by heart, engineers who could repurpose streetlights into covert displays. On Asterion Reach, Niko Tan watched the sky every night, looking for the gleam of an incoming ship. He secretly met with other teenagers in a storage shed behind a water reclamation plant, sketching diagrams of rooftop wiring and hidden lanterns. "We can't stop them from cutting our power," he said, chalk scraping on metal. "But we can rig circuits they don't know about. If we can get enough lights in place before they notice." "We're just kids," one of his friends whispered. "Yeah," Niko said. "So they won't think we're dangerous. That's our advantage." The first run was tomorrow's landing. The world hung in space like a dull coin, a thin atmosphere clinging to rock and ice. Tranquility Warden cruisers patrolled in lazy loops above it, secure in the knowledge that everyone on the surface was sufficiently cowed. Polaris Run dropped out of FTL 2 light minutes away. In her shadow, a snowline courier, uncoupled and dove. Samira piloted, eyes narrow, fingers steady on the controls. Davor's modifications hummed around her. Heat-sink arrays rerouted waste signature into odd patterns that, at a distance, looked more like a drifting ice rock than an incoming ship. As they approached the ring system, a band of ice and dust and shattered moonlets, Samira angled the courier into the chaotic plane. "Traffic control is pinging us," Niko said from the co-pilot's chair. "Broadcasting Dominion Authority, requesting identification." "Send the decoy," Samira said. Niko tapped a command. A small, cheap drone they had nicknamed the Dummy peeled off, broadcasting a fake transponder code linked to a legitimate ore hauler. The Wardens honed in on it like hunters spotting prey. "They're moving to intercept the Dummy," Niko said. "We've got a 5-minute window." Samira threaded the courier through the ring. Ice chunks tumbled past, some close enough to sheathe the hull briefly in glittering vapor before spinning away. Serenity Net sensors, unable to penetrate the particulate mess, downgraded the anomaly. "Drop point in 20 seconds. Davor's voice crackled over comms from Polaris Run. Pods primed. "Make it a pretty fall," Samira said. The courier skimmed the top of the atmosphere. Below, Morrow's Landing's main settlement lay in shadow, its streets unlit. Power restrictions, enforced against seasonal excess. Samira flipped a switch. The cargo bay doors whispered open. 6 compact pods shot out, each disguised as a broken piece of ice, each with a controlled re-entry burn that would bring them down near prearranged coordinates. On the surface, in a shuttered warehouse, a handful of colonists waited in the frigid dark. They heard the faint whine of something streaking overhead, then impacts, distant thuds, and the hiss of heat meeting snow. By the time Warden patrols investigated the projected landing zones, the pods were gone. Melted footprints and a few stray ornament fragments were all that remained. Inside a cramped home on the edge of the crater, A child touched a starlight tree's activation pad. The collapsed filaments shuddered, then unfolded with insect grace into a full, three-dimensional cone of light. Colors washed through it, unfamiliar shapes weaving through the spectrum. For the first time since the proclamation, someone on Morrow's Landing pressed their face to a window and saw something beautiful and forbidden reflected in the glass. The test worked, Amrita said hours later, exhausted but exultant. No Serenity Net flag, no Warden interception beyond the dummy. The system classified the heat spikes as meteorological phenomena. Maybe we got lucky, Devore muttered. Maybe we outsmarted them, Samira said. Orion listened to the playback of a message someone on Morrow's Landing had sent unauthorized, routed through an old smuggler channel to reach them. A woman's voice, rough with tears and laughter at once. "You mad people," she said. "You actually did it. My grandson thinks you're magic. You understand what you've started, right?" Orion did. They had opened a door. There was no closing it now. Operation Emberfall moved from test to full execution. Snowline Squadron departed Port Halcyon in stages, each ship officially on unrelated runs. Medical relief, equipment transfers, personnel shuttles. Somewhere in the space between inspection pods and Serenity Net blindspots, they slid sideways into outlaw lanes. On the Candlebelt worlds, strange things began to happen. On an icy moon girdled by glaciers, miners woke to find strings of ember lanterns hidden in ore carts and tool lockers. Instructions scrawled in a dozen different hands told them how to sync the lanterns to flash-coded messages across the frozen valley walls. On a desert planet where sandstorms were constant, people discovered flat, mirrored discs tucked under doorways. When the right sequence of knocks was tapped on them, preloaded projectors flicked on, turning the billowing dust into a sky full of shifting images. Stars that formed old constellations, faces of distant family members, the outline of a ship with a familiar name, ghosted along its hull. On ocean platforms rocking in stormy seas, compact sonic projectors appeared in fish crates and under dining tables. When switched on, they hummed with harmonics that, when matched by human voices, blossomed into full choruses. People learned to sing softly, so softly that Dominion microphones registered it as background noise, while the water carried their melodies along the pylons and under the waves. Each drop was a tiny defiance. Each one carried, embedded somewhere in its light patterns or encoded in its circuitry, a piece of information that, if shared widely enough, would add up to something more. A timing cue, a symbol to paint on doors, a phrase to include in greetings if you were part of what was coming. The Serenity Net watched. It logged anomalies. It flagged some for Warden inspection. But its revised training data, gently sabotaged by Salen's allies, now contained countless examples of safe communal merriment. The programmers who oversaw it had no idea how hard it had become for their creation to tell the difference between a festival and its own sample footage. Minister Kuran viewed the early reports with tight-lipped unease. "There is a pattern here," he told Archregent Vithek in a chamber of polished stone on Elith Prime. "Unauthorized gatherings, coordinated timing, symbol recurrence, human imagery being used as signals." Vithek, tall and spare, paced slowly. His skin, in the pale tones of his species, took on a faint bluish cast when agitated. "You promised me this ban would demonstrate the Dominion's power," he said. "Instead, I see little comets of rebellion sparking everywhere." "The measures are working on most colonies," Kuran insisted. "Enforcement is effective. We are seeing a decrease in overt unrest indicators." "Then why?" Vithek said, pointing at a holomap. "Did this happen on Morrow's Landing? And here, on Vashti's moon? And here, on Lyra's station?" Images hovered in the air. A makeshift tree in a mining hall, glowing atop a pile of machinery. A line of ember lanterns floating down a desert street. A crowd of humans and non-humans huddled together in an ocean storm, singing low. "An outlier," Hiran said. "A coordinated smuggling effort. We are moving to identify the source." He highlighted a vessel silhouette, HSS Polaris Run. "This human ship has altered course repeatedly to be in position near reported incidents," he said. "Its manifests are anomalously vague. Its crew roster includes several individuals flagged as high influence." Vithek studied the projection. The old Terran crest on the hull flared briefly as the image rotated. "Then you will take it," Vithek said, "publicly, on one of their precious worlds. And you will crush this holiday in front of them, so there is no confusion about who rules here." Kuran bowed his head. "As you command." On Asterion Reach, Niko and his friends climbed rooftops under cover of night. They moved carefully, timing their footfalls to coincide with gusts of wind or passing ground vehicles to mask any noise. In backpacks, they carried coils of wire, stolen junction boxes, and small, flat packets wrapped in dull gray plastic, their share of Emberfall's contraband. The buildings in their district were old, built during the first frantic wave of colonization. Their bones were sturdy, their maintenance, under Dominion austerity rules, lacking. It wasn't hard to find access panels half-rusted or seals that could be coaxed open without setting off alarms. "Here," Niko whispered, kneeling by a junction box. "We tap into the grid here, run the line up along that ridge, and hide the connectors under the ventilation housings. Won't they see the power draw?" His friend Jara whispered back. "Not if we keep each string under the sensor threshold," Niko said. "We distribute it, spread it thin." He remembered the message from Polaris Run, relayed through networks that Warden filters still thought were used for trading video games. Short bursts, no sustained peaks. Think of light as drizzle, not downpour. Hours later, with fingers numb and faces stinging from the cold, they unwrapped one of the packets. Inside lay a string of tiny lights embedded in a flexible strand. To an untrained eye, they looked ordinary enough. To someone who knew what to look for, the subtle variations in spacing, the faint inscription in an unassuming corner, Emberfall's silent maker's mark told a story. Niko swallowed against the sudden weight in his throat. He thought again of the pile of burning ornaments, the Warden's smirk. He thought of his little sister, asking why the sky would be dark this year. He pressed the activation pad. Nothing happened. For a heartbeat, despair surged. Then the first bulb warmed, a tiny, hesitant glow. The next lit in response. Then the next, rippling outward along the strand. The colors were soft at first, amber, deep blue, gentle green. Then, as the pattern completed, a brighter pulse ran along the line. The lights settled into a slow breathing rhythm. To any Warden scanner, it would look like minor electrical noise from rooftop equipment. To anyone standing beneath, it would feel like a heartbeat in the sky. "Do you think they know?" Jara asked quietly. "Who? The ones who sent this. Do you think they know we're actually doing it?" Niko thought of the face on his screen, the captain he had pleaded with. He pictured him in a ship somewhere in the dark, steering by stolen maps and stubbornness. "I think they're counting on us," Niko said. Orion did count on them. From Polaris Run's command deck, he watched the Candlebelt's telemetry. Every so often, a new blip appeared, a minor, localized disturbance, a cluster of signals that SerenityNet marked as cultural expression, low threat. Hana stood beside him, arms folded, studying the patterns. "They're adding their own flourishes," she said. "Look at this one on Cassiel's rim. Instead of string lights, they're using heat signatures from rooftop grills. Families cooking together on a rotation so the power draw never spikes too high. And here on Chandra's Drift," Amrita said from the logistics console, "they've synced the lanterns with tidal pumps. Every time the water surges, the lights flicker in a sequence." "They're improvising," Hana said. "It's working." Pride colored her tone. Selen's terminal chimed. She frowned, reading. "We have a problem," she said. "Actually, we have two." She brought up a secure dispatch intercepted from a Dominion channel. Lines of Calareth script scrolled, translated into standard. "Tranquility Warden Task Force Delta," she read aloud. "Orders to converge on Asterion Reach. Intelligence suggests that is where the smuggling operation is being coordinated. Secondary orders: monitor Polaris Run's vector. If we deviate toward the Candlebelt, we are to be challenged, boarded, and detained." "So, someone talked," Niko said. "Or someone got lucky," Devore said. "Maybe they noticed all the coincidence." In any case, Celine continued, if we go to Asterion Reach, they'll be waiting, and the proclamation's enforcement is about to get a lot uglier. Orion stared at the glowing point that represented Asterion Reach on the map. Somewhere under that light, Niko and his friends were wiring rooftops. Somewhere there, ember lanterns waited in hidden closets. They want to make an example, he said. They want to catch us in the act and broadcast it to everyone. Samira flexed her hands on the back of a chair. We could skip it, she said reluctantly. Hit the others. Come back later, when things calm down. Hena shook her head vehemently. That's the world that sent us the first plea. If we abandon them now... Amrita looked between them. If we barge in now, we walk right into their trap. We can't help anyone if Polaris Run ends up in chains. Then we don't walk in, Orion said. We drop in. We make the trap work for us. He turned to the hollow. The diagram of Asterion Reach's orbit sprang up, overlain with Warden patrol paths, Serenity Net nodes, and thanks to Gorvak's old map's decommissioned satellite orbits, no one had bothered to scrub from the system yet. We give them something to see, he said. A decoy run right where they expect us. While they're busy, Snowline Squadron threads the gaps. Amrita chewed her lower lip. We could emphasize the vectors we know they're tracking, she said, fingers flying. Make our approach loud enough to draw their gaze. And on the ground? Hena asked. They're tightening curfew, door-to-door inspections. They're ready to shut down anything even hinting at a gathering. Orion's mind flashed to Niko's chalk diagrams. We don't organize the ground event, he said. We seed the means. We trust them to decide how far they're willing to go. He looked around the bridge. We do what we can. They do what they can. That's all any of us can ask. When Polaris Run dropped out of FTL at the edge of Asterion Reach's system, the trap closed with brutal precision. 3 Tranquility Warden cruisers broke formation from their lazy loops and moved into an interception vector. A web of sensor pings washed over the human ship, probing, classifying. Unidentified vessel. A tight, clipped voice snapped over comms. You are entering a restricted enforcement zone under the Harmony Proclamation. Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded. Celine straightened her uniform, sending our identity codes and stating mission, she said. Officially, we're conducting a scheduled inspection of environmental reclamation equipment. Orion nodded once. Do it, and stall. Amrita, at the second console, muted her mic. Snowline Squadron is away, she murmured. On the tactical display, 3 tiny icons courier ships peeled off Polaris Run's wake and vanished into the background clutter, broadcasting no emissions. Gorvak's old comet lurked farther out. Engines cold, ready to pounce if someone needed extraction. On the planet below, Niko sat on a rooftop in the biting wind, clutching a small handheld receiver. Signals in, he whispered. The pattern came as a series of pulses, 3 short, 2 long, 1 short, the agreed-upon code for now. Target time? Jara asked, teeth chattering. Niko checked the timing burst. Around 9 p.m., he said. Planetary standard. That gives us 2 hours. On the streets, wardens marched in pairs, scanning doorways. Drones drifted overhead, cameras swiveling. Loudspeakers repeated the curfew notices, naming the Harmony Proclamation as justification for the enforced quiet. Behind closed curtains, ember lanterns sat dormant. Snowline couriers, moving in micro-bursts of thrust between chunks of naturally occurring space debris, drew close enough to drop their last waves of pods. They tumbled through the upper atmosphere like errant meteors, scattering across the city. In one pod, invisible to all but the most sensitive instruments, rode a cluster of devices no larger than ornaments. Microtransmitters, coded to wake up at a precise time and broadcast a light show pattern that would sync with rooftop wiring. On one Warden cruiser, a team of Calorith officers huddled around a tactical hollow, studying Polaris Run's trajectory. They are complying, an analyst said. Slowing engines, presenting docking ports. We will board and seize contraband, the captain said. Broadcast it to every screen on the surface. Let them see what happens to smugglers of unlawful joy. We are also receiving anomalous data from the surface, another tech reported. Minor irregularities in rooftop power usage, classified as civilian activity, low threat. Then ignore it. the captain snapped. "Focus on the ship." On Polaris Run, Niko checked his sidearm and the non-lethal crowd dispersal gear attached to his armor. He wore a Warden facsimile uniform over his own. The insignia were slightly off, the seam lines a little too crisp. "I hate uniforms," he muttered. "You look convincing," Hana said. "Ready to stage a prison transfer?" Niko's squad of hand-picked Marines, also in counterfeit Warden gear, nodded grimly. "We go over in their shuttle," Orion said. "They think they're about to make an arrest. While they're focused on us, Samira and Devor implement the second part." In engineering, Devor ran his hands over the auxiliary reactors, feeling the thrum of energy in his bones. "When I say overload, I mean overload just enough that it looks scary but doesn't actually kill us," he told the junior techs. "If we do this right, half the Warden sensors will think our core is about to go critical. They'll scramble. The Serenity Net will reclassify local events as emergency response and deprioritize surface anomalies. And if we do it wrong?" a tech asked, wide-eyed. Devor smiled tightly. "Then we celebrate in vacuum." At 8:57 p.m. on Asterion Reach, the city lay in enforced quiet. The sky was a flat, dull slate. No lights burned in windows, by order of the Wardens. The air tasted of cold metal and distant ash. On the rooftop, Niko watched the seconds tick by on his cracked wristband display. "Do you really think they'll make it?" Jara whispered. He thought of the recording he had sent, of the captain's face, which he had only seen through a fuzzy, unsanctioned clip, of the stories whispered in market lines, about a human warship turned courier, about ember lanterns appearing where none had been before. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I know what we said we'd do if they tried." At 9 p.m. exactly, the microtransmitters in hundreds of small devices, lanterns, encoded ornaments, repurposed consumer gadgets woke up and sent a single instruction pulse through the ad hoc network Niko and his friends had built. On rooftops across the district, hidden strings of lights came to life, first in a trickle. A handful of windows glowed, then gutters, then the edges of buildings. Then the pattern unfurled. It had been designed to mimic an ancient spiral found in cave art, a motif from Earth, and half a dozen newer human cultures. The light swirled outward, line after line, climbing up tower blocks, tracing along bridges, looping across open squares. The design, seen from above, resembled a galaxy tumbling in miniature across the city. People inside their dark homes noticed the faint glow seeping through cracks and shutters. One by one, they disobeyed orders and pulled curtains aside, blinked against the sudden splashes of color, and gasped. On the ground, Wardens shouted into comms, pointing frantically at the rooftops. "Unauthorized illumination!" someone barked. "Grid breach! Initiate blackout!" Dominion technicians at central stations slammed switches. Power routings changed. Authorized circuits went dark. But Niko and his friends had built their own web, tapping into neglected maintenance lines, forgotten emergency links, and standalone batteries scrounged from 100 sources. The lights dimmed, fluttered, and then steadied. On the Warden cruiser, warning lights flashed across consoles. "We are detecting a spike in surface energy usage," the analyst reported. "Pattern resembles." They trailed off, staring at their screen. The Serenity Net's overlay had, in real time, slapped a classification tag over the image of the swirling rooftop lights. Cultural expression, low threat. "Override that," the captain said irritably. "Manually reclassify as unrest precursor." The tech tried. The system beeped a refusal. "Net override requires level 6 authorization," it informed him blandly, proceeding with standard protocols. On Polaris Run's bridge, Devor threw his overload switch. The auxiliary reactor output surged, briefly spiking beyond safe levels. Alarms wailed. Heat diffusers flushed, venting excess energy in controlled pulses. "Containment holding," he said through gritted teeth. "If the net doesn't think we're about to blow, nothing will." In the Warden Task Force's control room, sensor feeds flickered with false red, All ships. Emergency. The human vessel is experiencing a core anomaly, someone shouted. All units focus on stability operations. Restrict fire until hazard assessment complete. For a critical 2-minute window, the Serenity Net's attention was yanked upward, away from the rooftops, away from the swirling galaxy of stolen light. On streets below, colonists stepped out of their homes despite the curfew, drawn by the glow, by the faint sounds that began to accompany it, someone humming an old tune, someone pounding a pot in a makeshift rhythm, a child laughing. Niko stood on his rooftop, chest heaving, face lit by colors. "We did it," Jara whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "We actually did it." He looked across the city and saw other rooftops lined with silhouettes, people raising their hands toward the light, as if in benediction. Wardens tried to bark orders. Some pushed through crowds, weapons held too tight, but even they, helmets reflecting the swirling display above, hesitated. This wasn't a riot. It wasn't a factory occupation. It was people standing still, singing. Songs spread like a contagion. The melodies came from different heritages, some earthborn, some from colonies that had grown their own myths. The harmonies met and braided, creating something new that still carried old bones. In one Warden command post, Niko and his disguised Marines escorted a handful of supposed dissidents into a holding bay colonists selected in advance by Emberfall's network. Once inside, Niko palmed a control bead, disguised as a button on his sleeve. Ornament-sized devices taped innocently to support struts and conduit shafts around the room, detonated not with shrapnel, but with light. Holographic shards of white and color burst everywhere, bouncing between mirrored surfaces in dazzling chaos. Cameras overloaded. Sensor suites glitched. For a handful of long seconds, the room was effectively blind. "That's our cue," Niko said. The prisoners shed their fake restraints. Hidden tools came out. In less than a minute, they had neutralized 2 guards with non-lethal stunners and slipped back out into the corridor, melting into the general confusion as alarms screamed, and officers tried to understand why their feeds were full of swirling, harmless light. On Elith Prime, Minister Kuran watched the feeds with growing horror. "This is not simple disobedience," he said to Vithik. "This is performance. They are turning our enforcement into their spectacle." Holographic windows showed Asterion Reach from orbit. The light storm blooming across rooftops. The clusters of people in the streets. The human warship angling itself to look as if it were on the verge of catastrophic failure, yet somehow holding together. On the far left of the display, almost out of frame, a tiny courier ship shot down through a gap in Warden coverage, dropped 3 pods, and yanked back out. Emberfall's cargo for Asterion Reach had landed. Within those pods lay not just more lanterns and ornaments, but encoded messages, audio clips of other world celebrations, texts describing small acts of safe sabotage, a single repeated phrase translated into a dozen tongues. "What's left that belongs to us?" On the surface, someone projected those words onto a blank wall, one language after another. People read them and murmured back an answer. This. In the days that followed, the story of Asterion Reach's lightstorm slipped past Dominion filters and raced through human and non-human channels alike. Clips showed children laughing under illegal lights. Teenagers, like Niko, faces wind-burned and exultant. Standing on rooftops, workers and elders locking arms in the streets, singing softly while wardens shuffled at the edges, unsure whether to break them up or back away. "We asked for one thing," a middle-aged woman said in one clip, her eyes blazing. "To gather with our families, to remember we're more than tools." They said no. "We did it anyway. Tell us again. Who's dangerous here?" The Dominion tried to clamp down. They increased sensor sensitivity. They authorized more aggressive responses. They sent a stern communique to Port Halcyon, demanding an explanation for Polaris Run's unprofessional conduct. Celine, with the practiced calm of a diplomat who had been lying for causes big and small all her life, replied with regretful astonishment. Of course they had complied with every order. Of course the core anomaly had been an unfortunate malfunction, not a tactical ploy. Any surface incidents were surely local misunderstandings. Someone in the Dominion Data Analysis Corps noticed that every time the Serenity Net flagged a suspected Emberfall event as low threat, outcomes tended to be peaceful. They argued in internal memos that maybe allowing humans their winter release valves had a stabilizing effect. Their memo was buried under more urgent missives about symbol contagion and narrative warfare. Meanwhile, on worlds where Emberfall packages had landed, the banned holidays' rituals mutated and multiplied. People rewrote the old myths. They told stories of a ship that refused to obey. They invented new songs about a captain who outran the darkness. They created small paper replicas of Polaris Run and hung them in windows. The ship itself never saw this directly, but fragments reached them in clips and second-hand tales. The crew would gather in the mess and watch them in a kind of quiet awe. "They're making us larger than life," Hana said once, voice trembling. "They're turning us into archetypes." "Humans do that," Samira said. "We turn everything into stories. And then we act like the stories," Niko added. "Which is how we get into trouble." Orion listened, humbled and uneasy in equal measure. He had never meant to become a legend. He just hadn't been able to stomach the idea of a child watching their world's joy burn in a warden's incinerator. "Remember," he said, "the story isn't just about us. It's about them. We lit the ember. They're the ones making it a fire." As Operation Emberfall neared its planned culmination, one world remained unconquered: Hearthspire. Not for lack of opportunity. It lay not terribly far from routes Polaris Run had already traveled. It had lines of sympathetic freight captains and sympathetic bureaucrats. It had a population whose memory of winter rituals ran deeper than any other human colony. But the Dominion knew that too. Of all the Candlebelt, Hearthspire bristled most with warden ships. Patrol patterns there were tighter, more disciplined. Serenity net coverage around it was dense, layered, and overseen by techs with explicit orders to treat any anomaly as suspicious, no matter how festive. Vythik wanted to make Hearthspire his demonstration. "We will allow their band day to approach without interference," he told Kuharan in a strategy session. "We will let rebels and smugglers believe they have gained ground. And when they try to repeat Asterion Reach on this world of theirs, we will crack down so hard their grandchildren will still be afraid." Kuharan, who had actually read the full reports of Asterion Reach and seen the quiet resolve in the eyes of its citizens afterward, thought this was dangerously short-sighted, but he nodded. "The Polaris Run will go there," Vythik continued. "It is the captain's home. You can see his patterns, how he circles it. We will take him in his own sky, and we will do it live." On Polaris Run, in the small hours of a ship's night, Orion lay awake in his bunk, staring at the ceiling. Hearthspire called to him, not just as coordinates, but as a place of warmth in his memory. The crackle of cheap space heaters in an overcrowded apartment, the sound of distant singing drifting up through pipes, the taste of sweet, spiced drinks when his family could afford them. The glow of his grandmother's tree as snow fell outside. He could imagine, too vividly, what the proclamation looked like there. Warden checkpoints on every corner, loudspeakers blaring curfew notices over streets that should have been full of people laughing, decorations pulled down and piled in central squares to be burned. They had already lit Emberfall on 39 worlds. The whole operation had been built with the promise, unspoken but bone deep, that they would not skip Hearthspire, but to go there directly was to step into the jaws of the Dominion. He rose, pulled on a jacket, and went to the observation lounge. Hana sat there already, wrapped in a blanket, feet tucked under her. She did not look surprised to see him. "You know it's a trap," she said without preamble. "I'd be worried if it weren't," he replied. "It would mean they didn't care." "They care very much," Hana said. "Too much. I've seen this pattern in other histories. Empires obsess over symbolic victories. Hearthspire is a symbol. So is the proclamation," Orion said. "So is Emberfall. They will throw an obscene amount of force at that planet," Hana said, "because they think if they can crush a holiday there, they can unwrite all of this." "They're wrong," Orion said, "but they can make it hurt." They sat in silence for a while, watching the slow drift of stars. "What if we don't go?" Hana said finally. Her voice was quiet, careful. "What if we accept that we've already done more than anyone expected, and we live to fight another cycle. And what happens on Hearthspire this year? Orion asked. Curfew and darkness, screens looping approved content, children staring at ration packs where their gifts should be, people thinking they came for Cassio, for Asterion, for Morrow, but when it was our turn, they were too afraid. I didn't say I liked the answer, Hannah said. I'm just saying it's an answer that lets us see another day. And if we go, Orion said, we might not see another day at all. Hannah looked at him. What are you actually asking, Orion? He took a breath. I'm asking, he said, if the risk is worth the story. He realized as he spoke that it was the truest articulation of his inner calculus he had managed yet. Humans told stories. Those stories shaped futures. The tale of the banned holiday was being rewritten right now, in 1,000 small voices. But how it ended, where it paused, at least mattered. If the ending was, and then the Dominion scared them into stopping, that would linger. So would. And then humans decided some worlds weren't worth standing up for. But if the ending was something else, Hannah's gaze softened. Stories are dangerous, she said. You know that now, but this one. She sighed. If we leave Hearthspire in the dark, we hand the Dominion a better story, the one where fear works. She folded the blanket around her shoulders like a cloak. So we go, she said. But we go in a way that makes the story too big for them to erase. The next day, Orion gathered the crew. We have one world left, he said. Hearthspire. You all know what it means to humans. The Dominion does too. They will be ready. A holo of Hearthspire rotated above the table, wrapped in rings of projected Warden patrol routes and Serenity Net nodes. Gorvak has given us a possible path, Amrita said, bringing up another layer, a ragged, twisting arc labeled Auric Drift. Gorvak himself, patched through in from the old comet, chimed in, his voice rough with excitement. Most folk avoid this bit of space, he said. Too many gravimetric eddies, too much debris, easier routes around. But if you ride the currents just right, the drift will spit you out practically on top of Hearthspire, right past the picket line. It's not a jump, Davor said. It's a tumble. The ship will be thrown around like a leaf in rapids. We'll have minimal control. But we'll have surprise, Samira said. We drop in before they can build up a targeting solution, we make our broadcast, we deliver what we can, and then we let the drift fling us back out before they can pin us down. And during that time, Celine asked, we will have drawn every eye in the region. The Dominion will watch us. So we make that our lever, Hannah said. We time it. We send a signal to every world Emberfall has touched. We ask them to light up all at once. Not just the candle belt. Any world that wants to. A synchronized burst. Something too big for the Serenity Net to classify cleanly. We've been careful so far, Orion said. We've worked in shadows. For Hearthspire, we step into the light. We dare everyone to look away. He scanned the faces around him. They were tired, strained, shadowed by the weeks of danger behind them. They were also alive with something fierce and bright. No one signed up for this part, he said. What we're talking about could get us killed, or worse. If anyone wants to sit it out, say so now. No shame in it. Silence. Then Davor snorted. I didn't rebuild half this ship just to let some smug Kalereth think he outsmarted me, he said. If we're going to blow up, we're going to blow up doing something interesting. Samira grinned. I've never ridden the Auric Drift on purpose, Amrita said. I've already sent feelers to Emberfall contacts. If we send the right timing packet, they can be ready. Celine's eyes were steady. This is what diplomacy is for, she said. Not banquets, choosing which impossible risk to take to protect your people. Niko rolled his shoulders. If this is where we make our stand, he said, then I'd rather be on the line than on the sidelines. Hannah glanced at Orion. You know my answer, she said. Orion nodded. Then we go. The Auric Drift welcomed them with violence. Waves of distorted gravity buffeted Polaris Run as soon as it crossed the boundary. The stars beyond the viewports stretched and twisted, colors smearing. Alarms yelled in half a dozen tones.
Inertial dampers are at maximum,
Devore shouted. Any more, and they'll damp us right through the deck plates. Keep us pointed at where Hearthspire is going to be, not where it is, Samira said through gritted teeth, her hands flying over the navigation controls. The currents here don't care what your charts say. On the old comet, riding a slightly safer eddy nearby, Gorvak laughed and whooped, body plates rattling as his ship shuddered. This is flying, he crowed. This is life. Try not to die, little humans. In the mess and crew quarters, unsecured objects rattled. People strapped themselves in. No one slept. Hannah sat in the communications alcove, sending one last packet out ahead of them on every Emberfall channel. It contained a simple message. When you see Hearthspire's sky light up, if you can, light your own. No one can celebrate for you. We can only remind you it's your right. She added a timestamp. The approximate moment when Polaris Run would burst out of the drift near Hearthspire. It was a guess, refined by Gorvak's centuries of accumulated hunches and Davor's equations. On half-forgotten worlds, on stations and ships that had quietly joined in Emberfall's spread, people forwarded that packet in whispers and winks. On the 40 worlds of the Candle Belt, families unboxed ember lanterns they had hidden from Warden searches. They checked concealed wiring. They told children, stay near the window tonight. On Hearthspire, in a cramped apartment in a mid-level block, an old woman Orion's grandmother sat by a bare wall, her hands folded. She had heard rumors. She had no proof. She had saved, for this day, a single ornament, a tiny wooden comet, its paint chipped. If they come, she told herself, they will see I waited. From the Auric Drift's churning maw, Polaris Run tumbled out into relatively calm space. Hearthspire filled half the forward view. Its night side lay underneath them, a swath of darkness interrupted by the grid of authorized lights. Warden bases, industrial zones, official transit corridors. Around it, like a net of thorns, circled Dominion ships, Tranquility Wardens, heavier patrol vessels, sensor platforms linked directly into the Serenity net. For one glorious moment, Samira whispered, they have no idea we're here. Then the sensors picked them up. Alerts spread. Ships pivoted. Targeting arrays spun. Broadcast open, Celine said. All bands. All languages we have. Orion stepped forward. His face filled screens across Hearthspire, across the Candle Belt, across any world tuned to Dominion news. He did not stand at attention. He did not wear full dress uniform. He wore his ship's plain work jacket, with the faded Terran crest on one shoulder. My name is Orion Malik, he said. I am the captain of this ship. I was born on Hearthspire. I grew up on streets you can't see from here because the proclamation ordered them dark. In Warden command centers, officers barked orders to cut the feed. Technicians scrambled to comply, but something in the Serenity Net's priorities, the part gently distorted by Salen's allies, hesitated. This looked, to its logic, like a high-profile cultural broadcast. Those often correlated with stability. It didn't immediately sever it. In my family, Orion continued, we have a winter tradition. When the nights are longest and the cold is worst, we gather. We share food, if we have it. We light whatever we can. Candles, strings, heaters. We tell stories. It doesn't belong to any one creed. It belongs to the fact that we are alive, and that we would like to stay that way. On Hearthspire's surface, people who had their screens on to monitor Dominion edicts blinked as the feed changed. In some cases, wardens had forced building broadcasts to stay on official channels. In those cases, it meant every resident of that building saw Orion's face, unfiltered. The Dominion says this is dangerous, Orion said. They say that for your protection, they must take it away. They say that if you come together to remember who you are, you might become unruly. You might become hard to manage. His eyes were steady, voice calm. They are right, he said. When we remember who we are very hard to manage. In the observatory of Elith Prime, Vithik's hands shook with long-suppressed fury. Cut him off, he hissed. Now. We are attempting, a tech said, panicked. The net is, misclassifying the feed. It believes this is scheduled content. Quaron stared at the side scrolling of system logs. Lines flashed past. Cultural event stream detected. Risk index, moderate. Recommended action, monitor for escalation. The Thessari, he whispered, realizing. They've been feeding it. But the realization came too late. On Hearthspire's night side, a small drone formation launched from Polaris Run and from hidden hangars on the ground. Thousands of mirror-bright microcraft rose, their emitters synced to a pattern preloaded by Hana. They scattered into the high atmosphere, then ignited. Above the planet, a tapestry unfurled. Lines of light stitched themselves into shapes, constellations from old Earth skies, geometric motifs from Thessari art, swirling glyphs from Jarun tales, stylized figures from Calareth myth that depicted the balance of many voices. Every culture that had touched Operation Emberfall, woven into one display. On the Candlebelt worlds, ember lanterns flared to life, starlight trees unfolded, rooftop circuits crackled and sang. People poured into streets and domes and open halls. On every world, whatever they had managed to squirrel away or build, they lit. The Serenity Net shuddered under the incoming torrent of signals. It was trained to see large waves of violent activity as dangerous and to focus on them. It was also now, thanks to weeks of subtle manipulation, predisposed to label synchronized very bright, very joyful events as cultural celebrations and push them down its priority lists. Now, the whole sector erupted in celebration. Patterns collided in its input layer. Feedback loops oscillated. Machine logic tried to reconcile conflicting directives. This looks like what you told me festivals look like. This looks like what you told me to ignore. But it also happens everywhere at once. That suggests coordination. Coordination might be a threat. Threats must be flagged. But flagged events are often false positives in this category. Recalculate. With no clear answer, it defaulted to the safest inaction. Observe, but do not preempt. On Hearthspire, Warden stared at the sky. Bathed in multicolored light, orders screamed in their helmet. Speakers warred with the primal, universal awe of watching a planet-sized artwork bloom overhead. Orion's voice continued, carried now more by private rebroadcasts and screen recordings than by official channels. People held up handhelds to show each other. This isn't about one human tradition, he said. This is about all of us, on every world, who have something we do to get through the dark, something that reminds us we are not just workers or subjects. We are families. We are communities. We are cultures. He paused, letting the words sink in. No power in the galaxy can give you that, he said, and no power can take it if you choose to hold on to it. He leaned slightly closer, his gaze intense. So hold on to it, he said. In a side street on Hearthspire, a warden corporal aimed her weapon at a group of humans huddled around an illegal tree. The lights flickered over their faces, making them seem at once ancient and like children. Her finger tightened on the trigger. She saw, in a flash, her own childhood, on a Calareth world where winter storms howled and her family gathered around a bowl of bioluminescent algae, singing old songs. The memory had nothing to do with humans. It had everything to do with the feeling in the air. Her finger eased, her weapon lowered. My equipment is malfunctioning, she muttered into her comm. I'm unable to engage, requesting diagnostics. She wasn't the only one. On Hearthspire, enforcement fractured. Some warden squads pushed into crowds, but even then, their attempts to drag people away were half-hearted. Tangled by conflicting orders and the simple logistics of trying to break apart thousands of small gatherings at once, under a sky painting everything in wonder. Polaris Run hung in that sky like a bright chalk mark, every warden gun theoretically locked onto it. Targeting solutions ready, came the call in a Dominion control center, awaiting fire authorization. Vithek stared at the image of the ship. Destroy it, and they would make a martyr. Hesitate, and they would look weak. The calculations whirled. We will arrest them, Quaron urged. Capture, trial, confession, executions if necessary. That narrative holds more control than scorched debris. Can we even catch them? Vithek asked. Even as they argued, Davor watched his displays, feeling the engines teeter on the edge of what physics and engineering allowed. We've burned through half our safety margin, he told Orion. We can hold this position another minute, maybe 2, before the drift currents start yanking us back out. After that, I don't know where we end up. 1 minute, Orion said. He looked down at Hearthspire one last time. In some camera feed, he saw a tiny figure on a balcony, holding up a small wooden shape toward the sky, his throat constricted. That's my grandmother, he said softly. Hana, following his gaze, smiled through damp eyes. Then she knows, she said. On cue, Amrita triggered a final burst of data into the Emberfall network. Thank you. Hold on. We're still here. All Ryan said. Davor, get us out of here. Gladly, Davor said, flipping switches. Polaris Run rotated, angling its nose toward the seething turbulence of the Auric Drift. Its main engines flared, pushing the hull toward the edge of the safe-ish vector Gorvak had outlined. Behind them, Warden targeting systems struggled to update, fighting sensor ghosts generated by the drifting debris, the overload of light, the distortions in space-time. Firing at that moment risked hitting other Dominion ships. By the time a clear shot emerged, Polaris Run had already slipped into the raging half-reality of the drift and was gone. In the days that followed, the Harmony Proclamation remained on the books. No public retraction came from Elith Prime, no official apology, no admission of fault. On paper, Operation Emberfall was labeled a terrorist action. Orion Malik and his crew were wanted criminals. Reward notices circulated, describing them as agents of chaos who had imperiled order. But on the ground, on decks and domes, and in fields of snow or dust or waves, people called them something else. On Morrow's Landing, children wove little starship shapes into their winter crafts and told each other they were making ember couriers. On Asterion Reach, teenagers imitated Niko's rooftop wiring heroism, though he blushed and protested every time someone called him a resistance leader. On Hearthspire, old women in cramped apartments told younger neighbors, I saw them. I saw the ship. I saw our lights answer. Even among the Dominion's subjects from other species, whispers started. They did this not to seize power, a Thessari commentator said in a low-traffic forum, but to give something back to their people. Who else has done that? In quiet corners of Jarun cantinas, smugglers toasted to the human's audacity. In Warden barracks, some sat in their bunks and stared at their hands, thinking of the moment they had not pulled a trigger. As for Polaris Run itself, it disappeared into the maze of unregulated space for a while, pursued tangentially, but never cornered. Life aboard shifted from furious preparation to a strange, suspended calm. They licked their wounds. They repaired buckled hull plates. They watched, through sideways channels, the fallout of their actions. Do you think we won? Samira asked one night in the mess, half smile crooked, a cup of something warm cradled between her hands. We weren't fighting a battle you can win in one night, Hana said. We changed how people think about what's possible. That doesn't reset, Davor shrugged. Engines held together, he said. So that's a kind of victory. Niko leaned back. We proved that if you try to ban joy, humans will treat it as a challenge. Amrita looked at her datapad, where yet another message from a far-flung colony had pinged in. People sharing pictures of their own small Emberfall rituals, altered now, spreading. We showed them, she said, that if you want to keep humans in line, you probably shouldn't mess with our holidays. In a quieter voice, Selene added, we also showed other species that someone is willing to stand up to the Dominion for something that isn't a border dispute or a resource contract. That matters. Orion listened. He felt tired to his marrow, but underneath it there was a steady, stubborn glow. He had not set out to change the galaxy. He had just wanted to answer a boy's question. What's left that belongs to us? He looked around the table, at Hana's tired eyes and Samira's fierce grin, at Davor's grease-stained hands and Niko's steady gaze, at Amrita's endless lists and Celine's calm steel. He thought of his grandmother on her balcony, holding up a chipped wooden comet to a sky blooming with impossible light. This, he thought, this is what belongs to us. Far from human space, on a quiet Calareth colony that had watched the whole event on delayed feeds, a child padded to a window in the middle of the night. They held in their palms a tiny contraband ornament they had bought from a human trader weeks ago, not fully understanding why they wanted it. It was a crude imitation of an ember lantern, made from local materials, its glow uneven. They had seen clips of Hearthspire's sky, of the banned human holiday that had burned its way across 40 worlds anyway. They had heard the captain's words, translated in a flat Dominion voice, but still somehow warm. The child pressed their ornament to the glass. It lit, a small, stubborn spark, against the dark. Outside, the Dominion's emblem still hung on official buildings. The Harmony Proclamation was still, technically, law. Inside, in a small, quiet room, a Calareth child whispered the human word they had learned for what this was. Holiday, they said, tasting it. They smiled, and somewhere, far away, in the moving shadows of unregulated space, a human ship slipped between stars, carrying stories that no proclamation could ever fully contain.